Sangye chodan soki shonam la, janjo bardu dani kyapsu. Dangi jinso jipa sonam gi, drola pencher sangya, drobar sholom. Sanje tamje dewatang dewe kiran dewa, dunga tan dungin ki yun dawach, dunga mewa dewatang mitra wak, niran chadan yila neve. Donyama, ne paragirchi, sabo wa shoda sabadama, sabo wa shodo hang. So for me, a great honor and pleasure to be invited by the Jewel Heart organizers to do this tour through several of the Jewel Heart cities in America. And, we started in New York about a month ago or so, or maybe a little bit more than that, and then up to Chicago, and then Lincoln, Nebraska, and Hare. And of course it is a sort of a sad occasion, because 1 year since the passing of the great master, Kyabji Gelek Dorji Chung, who is one of the half-dozen greats, who until a year ago was one of the half-dozen greats who had received their complete training in Tibet under those very extraordinary masters who were part of the last generation of a free Tibet or independent Tibet prior to the Chinese invasion. But of course, the Demo Tugu has written a prayer for Rinpoche's swift return, and the Dalai Lama Gyalwar Rinpoche also did the same. So if students of Rinpoche and those close to him chant those twice a day, morning and evening, then there's a very good chance Rinpoche will take a look down from wherever he's floating around the universe and say, oh, I suppose I can come back. And this tradition of Tulku, reincarnate lamas, goes back to the early Nyingma school, 9th, 10th century of Tibetan Buddhism, when occasionally lamas would be pointed out as being reincarnations of some of the 25 great disciples of Padmasambhava. So the documentation isn't clear on the first tulku, even though we sometimes hear it said that it is, but it's not really clear. But we know that in the 9th and 10th centuries, lamas were known to, identified as reincarnations, as children, or reincarnations of some of the 25 great Chimpu, Trubchen, Nishu Sangha, they're called in Tibetan, the 25 Mahasiddhas of Mount Chimpu. And later in Tibet, it became more formal, so that once, especially if there was large labrangs or parts of large monasteries, and when a great lama would pass away, then students would request the head of the school for permission to search for the reincarnation and to reinstate that reincarnation. Our Kyabje Gelek Dorji Chung was originally one of the 3 candidates for Panchen Lama, 3 children thought to be the Panchen Lama. And I think if you look at his ears, he certainly had Panchen Lama ears. So I often mentioned that, and when I first mentioned it the first time, Rinpoche said, Glenn, don't spread these rumors. It's going to make trouble for me with the Chinese, and maybe even the Tibetan government will start making me do things I don't want to do. But to be one of the candidates for such a tulku, such a reincarnate lama, means that the child is born with exceptional signs of being a child protege. And eventually, because the state oracle said, well, we shouldn't do the tests because there's a China-favored candidate, and if we make an issue over it, could be bloodshed. And the Chinese are lobbying, will do a pretty good job. We'll do a good job, so we shouldn't make a issue of it and cause it to become an object of conflict. So as a result, Rinpoche was enthroned as a reincarnation of a Lama who had been very close to the previous Pranjan. On this tour, 4 of my Jewel Heart events are on weekends, and so the Ann Arbor organizers requested that on each Sunday morning I should do something on one of the 4 mindfulnesses. So we began in New York with Guru Yoga, and the first verse being referring to how to relate to one's teacher and the importance not only of having a teacher, but knowing how to how to get the benefit of, how to extract the essence of enlightenment from that relationship. And it's very frustrating, I think, for some lamas in Asia. People will say, oh, he's my teacher. And we'll say, well, what did you learn from him? Well, I mean, I put his picture on my altar and I pray to him. And so that's not what we consider in the tradition as what's considered Guru Yoga or effective working relationship. So often in Tibetan the name used is Lama Laten Sul, learning how to lean on a teacher, on a master. And it means in order for you to come to equal the master, that should be the aim, that the student should make as much progress towards enlightenment as is humanly possible. And of course, not everyone will equal their gurus. Some people will equal them and even perhaps become greater. There are a few examples of that in Tibetan history. It's not so common, but they'll even surpass their teachers. And often in Tibetan Buddhism, we have many teachers. I had about 35, and I think 2 or 3, I might have outdone them. But the other 30 or so are hard to catch up with. They're fast. But the idea of that first instruction in the Four Mindfulnesses is to remember one's spiritual teacher in such a way as to inspire one to practice and inspire one to practice correctly, and also to bring the warmth and humanity of the spiritual quest into one's life. How to have the actual feeling rather than it's just some sort of mathematical equation or scientific formula or something like this, a recipe for cooking. How to bring the sort of the warmth and the humor and the magic and the beauty of the Enlightenment tradition into one's own personal practice. That it's not just, sitting down to relax or trying to become a little sharper kind of thing, to bring the full warmth and beauty of the tradition. Lama Laten Sul, learning to lean on the master in an effective way, really has that kind of meaning. And the second of the mindfulnesses, the mindfulness of the bodhicitta, love and compassion, as the foundation of a spiritual life. The Dalai Lama often says, my religion is compassion. My religion is kindness. Of course, that's a lot more than that, but it begins with that and is founded in that and it's based on that. So this second mindfulness in the Four Mindfulnesses of the 7th Dalai Lama is, which is the oral tradition from Tsongkhapa, is the always keeping compassionate, kind, gentle, loving, ambience in one's presence, how to always sit in front of someone with kind, loving eyes, even if they're not that lovable a person. And, if we take the whole universe, probably, 10% of the peoples in the universe are lovable by most people. Then there'll be maybe 20% are lovable by 50% of the population, so on. But regardless of the lovability, the ostensible likability of that person, cultivating the mind that can always sit or rest with the sense of love, compassion, kindness, and gentleness in their presence. And I think when we remember our own great lamas, our own great teachers, I remember the first time I met the Dalai Lama, I think one of the most striking aspects of his presence is he really did have this sense of that he felt himself as your best friend. And he begins with one of his books by saying, wherever I go, I always try to see people as deep and cherished friends. And he may say try, but when you try to do something for a long time, it becomes a natural part of your modus operandi, doesn't it? How to be always loving, always compassionate in people's presence without any effort, just naturally being loving and kind and seeing them with gentle eyes. The name for Shenrezi, the Buddha of compassion in Tibetan, is Shenrezi. Eyes gazing softly gazing eyes, means the softness there meaning a kind of a love or an affection. In one of the seventh Dalai Lama's texts, he says, should be like a mother for her only child, to be able to look on every living being with the kind of care and affection that a mother looks upon her only child. And I think with the great masters, it really is like that. And certainly, I think Kyabje Gelek, Doji Chung had that kind of presence. As one of my British friends, Mike Parrott, once put it, he really was such a lovely man. But that's really what it means, what the seventh Dalai Lama means by the second mindfulness, what Tsongkhapa meant in that oral transmission of the Four Mindfulnesses, and in the second practice of always having love and compassion in one's presence, establishing it as one's second nature. And that brings us to the third mindfulness. And with all of these, we're relying upon the seventh Dalai Lama's text. And that text was part of a collection of poems I translated back in the late 70s under the guidance of a number of lamas, but Tempa Gyaltsum was one of the Geshe Tempa Gyaltsum was a very important one. And together with my very dear young Tibetan friend at the time, Losang Sanawa, who now lives and translates out of Australia. But I wanted to go through this collection of works and translate some poems that were very practical. And one of my teachers pointed that out as one of the sort of most user-friendly collection of poems in any of the Dalai Lama's sungbums, and perhaps more importantly, it also existed in India at the time, because a lot of books were lost in Tibet. And so eventually it came out as Songs of Spiritual Change, and that was later republished, where I wrote sort of lead-ins and contextualizations of each of the poems as meditations to transform the mind. So I don't have the meditations to transform the mind with me. And when we brought that out, I read through the text, Tibetan texts again, and made a few changes here and there. So this is like the, this is like the raw tape from the first recording before it went to the producers for electronic engineering. And so for each of those four mindfulnesses, mindfulness of keeping one's spiritual master, thoughts of one's spiritual master close, keeping the quality of love and compassion in one's heart, and thirdly, establishing a tantric ambience. I like to call it the tantric swagger, learning how to have a tantric swagger in one's gait. Actually, I didn't make that term up. I was once teaching in New York at Tibet House, and I was saying, this word divine pride they use in Tantra, I don't really like that. I really prefer the word tantric arrogance. Because, in Tibetan it's ngagyal, and ngagyal is the term normally used for pride as a klesha, as a delusion. And so here they purposely use that as a kind of a provocative challenge to this kind of traditional way of looking at things, or the kind of sutra way of looking at things. So I kind of said, I kind of like tantric arrogance. And this friend of mine, Sheldon Collins, he said, Glenn, I think tantric arrogance, tantric swagger. Let's go for tantric swagger. He's a photographer for the Metropolitan Museum and the Whitney in New York, so he tends to have a more, what you call, artistic, visual way. It's hard to get a good photograph of arrogance. Well, sometimes with some presidents you can capture it. But in terms of swagger is more kind of visual. And that's, of course, because the basis, the very foundation, in the Dalai Lama's commentary, or notes, I guess you could say, or notations to a reading of the Tsongkhapa's Ngariam Chemo, stages in tantric practice, Ngariam Chemo. He said the main difference between sutra and tantra is lagi ngagyal. Lagi naljor and lagi ngagyal. Ngagyal, tantric arrogance. And the main difference between sutra and tantra is you can't really practice tantra unless you have the foundations of sutra, whereas you can practice sutra without practicing tantra. The upside is that if you do practice tantra, it's quick and easy enlightenment. Whereas sutra takes many, many lifetimes. The 13th Dalai Lama from the heart of Shenrezi. I always have to remember names of my books because you never know what publishers are going to call your books. You send them a book and you give it what you think is a really great name, and it comes out with a completely unheard of name that you had never thought of, and you weren't asked for your opinion of these things or anything like that, which might be a wise thing because, authors get really kind of attached to their words and titles and things like that, so it's a good way to avoid conflict. Sort of like if you want to buy a new car and your wife or husband doesn't want you to buy a new car, don't discuss it beforehand. Just go out and buy the bloody thing, bring it home. Be sure you bring a nice present for your spouse and give that to them as you walk in the door. Honey, look what I bought for you. Here's a new vacuum cleaner. Oh, and by the way, or if it's the lady buying, oh, honey, there you are. Here's a whole new set of tools for the garage for you to fix the vacuum cleaner you bought me last year. So anyway, it's said that the 13th Dalai Lama, in the first chapter of my book, From the Heart of Shenrezhi, it's a commentary, a very brief summary of all the different tantric systems. So it's just a short text of maybe a couple of dozen pages, but he says, the 4 qualities of practicing Tantra is 1, that it's very easy to get enlightenment. 2, that why is it easy? Because it has such a vast plethora of methods. 3, because only really well-qualified people should practice it. So like any old dummy can practice Sutrayana, but not Tantrayana. You have to have Wangpo Rab. You should be of some, not intelligence, but more like karmic readiness. I guess what is popularly called in America these days, emotional IQ. A kind of a karmic readiness, an ability to have the ability to have a super positive mind, because the essence of tantric practice is always feeling a sense of your own Buddha nature manifesting within you as a kind of a Buddha quality right now. In other words, a kind of a tantric swagger. So you already have to be a very kind of high emotional IQ person to do that. Otherwise, if you're a grumpy, grumbly type, that once you take tantric initiation, you take the precept always to see yourself as a Buddha emanation of an awakened, fully awakened being, like a god or goddess. You take a precept to see all others as emanations of gods and goddesses, Buddhas and Buddhinis, Dakas and Dakinis, and so on. And whatever happens to see as unfolding, playful, joyful, celebratory theater, regardless of whether it appears a little harsh or a little out of sync with your own way of seeing things, or your own preferences for how things should go down. And the 4th reason why it's very fast is because it's practice on the basis of refining the bodily energies, reattuning the chakras and nadis, known in Tibetan, a practice known in Tibetan as Lu Wen, which literally means, Lu means body, and Wen means very far away. Like the name of Kedub's reincarnation, Wensapa, meant the guy from far away. The country he lived in, the kingdom he lived in Tibet, was called Far Away. So he was Wen. So Wensapa means Pa's guy, the guy from Sa place called Wen, far away. So Lu Wen, meaning the bodily energies and your ability to sense all that happens in your life is on a very subtle energy platform. The energetic platform itself is very, very subtle, is made subtle by the 2 methods of generation stage and completion stage Tantra. Generation stage meaning the mandala practices, and completion stage, basically you can say Tumo, Tibetan Chandali Yoga, which Chandali is the Buddhist for Kundalini. So if you want to study Kundalini the way it should be done, you study Buddhist Chandali. If you want to study it the way it shouldn't be done, you do Kundalini. No, put it this way, if you want to study it with a few mistakes in the application, do Kundalini. In the Buddhist world, we're allowed to make jokes about the Hindus. Because the Hindus like to make jokes about the Buddhists too. We're not allowed to make jokes about Christians, Muslims, or Jews, because their God is a jealous God and gets irritated if you make humorful remarks about such things. But the Hindus are okay with it. So here, for I know that, you see, because as a young boy, I was a choir boy in the Church of England, and then I was an altar boy, helping the minister finish off the wine after every service. And I will say, I performed my duties faithfully and without complaint. Okay, now where were we? We were going to read the third verse. And I diverted because I said, because Tantra is very easy, and a couple of people went like, doing, easy, doing. So then I thought, yes, I don't have to just say it's easy because I accomplished enlightenment easily, which I'm not saying, by the way. Am I hinting? But I have a quote from the 13th Dalai Lama who said, enlightenment is easy. Also, the 5th Dalai Lama said, enlightenment is easy. We have the clay of enlightenment in our hands. And like an artist takes clay and fashions it into a beautiful work of art, we can easily take the clay of our body and mind and shape them into perfect enlightenment, a perfect image of enlightenment. So actually I had 2 quotes to support my seemingly reckless statement. Okay, da-da-da-da, the verse. Da-da. In the inconceivable mansion. Inconceivable mansion, here Tibetan, Shelye Kong, which is really the mandala palace. When you look at a palace, yesterday someone was asking me about the medicine Buddha painting over in the corner, and the medicine Buddha is at the middle of a Shelye Kong, an inconceivable mansion. And it looks like a house, but it's actually, each part of it reflects a part of the enlightenment experience. The 4 doors going in, the one from the east is the 4 basic mindfulnesses of body and feelings and thoughts and of experience of phenomena. And the other around is the 5 powers and the 5 strengths and all 37 facets of enlightenment symbolized by that. So in that mansion, of great bliss, joyful to know. In other words, when we practice Tantra, we should maintain a basic foundation of great bliss, joyful to know. That's actually poetic, what you call it, maneuvering. But just great bliss, mahasukha in Sanskrit. And by doing what the 13th Dalai Lama mentioned as the isolation of the energies, but there I think we can say super refinement. The meaning of isolation is super refinement. Normally our energies are quite coarse, because they're running on the flesh and bone stuff, a little bit overriding, like when the sun's up during the day, you don't see the stars. Behind the brilliant sun are the stars shining, but we don't notice. In that same way, our subtle psychoneural system created by the brain chemistry, thyroidic chemistries, and chemistries of the abdominal areas and the navel chakras, our sexual what they call bindu in Sanskrit. All of the chemistry or the drops generated by these centers are silently flowing behind the scenes, like the sun, like the stars are invisibly shining behind the glare that the sun makes on the dust particles in the sky. And so all we get during the day, unless we're very subtle and clairvoyant, we go, yes, stars, stars everywhere, stars. But unless we have the ability to see beyond the sun particles bouncing off the dust particle, the sun bouncing off of dust particles, we don't see the stars. In that same way, the subtle brain chemistry, thyroid chemistry and whatnot is riding behind everything while our mind is distracted by all of the sensory phenomena, hearing and smelling and tasting and touching, seeing, and then thinking, conceptually hitchhiking conceptually from one thought stream to another, each of which is like a whole little theater in our mind, isn't it? We suddenly start thinking about our car, like, oh yes, if I take in this crappy old Audi I have and I come home with a beautiful Lamborghini, and if I walk in the house with like a really big armful of flowers, will I get away with it? So we're always hopping on one mind flow to another, and like this, and what about shopping tonight, and what am I cooking for dinner, and what's going on here, and what about what crazy thing is our beautiful president with his exceptional haircut done today? He fired who? So all of this going on behind, then we don't notice the natural platform or stage of joyful energies which our psychoneurosystem is creating. And rather than, if you will, dance on that stage, we're instead hopping between objects of the senses and hopping between conceptual mind flows about various events, being agitated by thinking about regrets about yesterday and anxieties about tomorrow. So in the Tantric tradition, we, in the inconceivable mansion of great bliss, joyful to know, put our awareness firmly on this joyful energy generated by Lu Wen, the refinement of the bodily energies, or isolation from ordinariness. So there sits the pure aspect of one's body and mind as the yidam. If one can find that platform of bliss, blissful being, there one can sit as the pure form, the joyful form of the yidam, both in body and mind. In other words, one can have a sense of the beauty of one's own body, the energetic brilliance of one's own body, and also the natural radiance, clarity, and wonder of one's own mind. So that's what's meant by the pure aspect. Pure in what way? Pure in that the kleshas are quietened, and also the entrapment by ordinary distorted sense of self and phenomena are reduced. Does that make sense? Our ordinary sense of self, we don't see ourselves as already a Buddha. We don't see ourselves as already a God. We don't see ourselves as a son of God or a daughter of God. We have a very secular sense of ourselves. And it's quite normal that that should be the case, in that we're living in a secular world and we have to, pay the bills and go home to the right house at night and stuff like that. This one Irishman, I better not tell an Irish tavern joke, should I? No, we'll leave that one till the secret tantric teaching that follows later. So this ordinary sense of self is, we have to know how the ordinary sense of self works to practice Tantra well. So in order to have a relaxed, transformed sense of self into ourself as purely a divine being, a tantric being, a son of God or daughter of God, if you will. But not God in kind of a God, a creator kind of thing, but like God in a kind of a universal, the universal goodness, the sort of the symbol or force of universal goodness. In order to have a sense of ourself as that, we need to transform our ordinary sense of self, to totally relax that and to look at how the sense of self is generated. Now, in the Emptiness teaching, Nagarjuna says this can be a little bit dangerous because when you start playing with the sense of self, then you can lose control. It's a little bit like trying to light a cigarette while you're looking for your cigarette lighter under your seat, and at the same time something else is happening in your car, and you're trying to, well, all at the same time staying straight on the road, or at least on the road. So Nagarjuna says, once you play with the sense of self, it becomes a little bit delicate, and that's why you should have a good teacher. But the problem is our ordinary sense of self is a completely mistaken, reified, illusory self. In Tibetan it's known as kunsob, which means completely false. In other words, when we look at the landmarks for how we establish as our sense of self, we'll notice that those landmarks melt away when we try to locate the self within them. So by then we see yourself as a yidam of three inseparable kayas. In other words, rather than my body as this hunk of flesh which is like painful and always complaining about this, that, or the other, like I'm hungry, or I ate too much, I'm thirsty, I drank too much, I need some exercise. Oh, my body hurts all over, I walked too far, too fast. Rather than seeing it in that way, notice its pure energetic aspect. How the body is really just molecules, and molecules are cells, the cells are atoms, and the atoms are made up of little electric pieces, and we're really just a kind of an illusory form of billions and trillions of universes walking in unison, or moving in unison. I love that very dear friend of the late great Kyabje Gelek Doji Chung, Alex Gray. I'm sure you know of him and his paintings. And I met him actually when I was with Rinpoche in New York one time. We were in a, I can't remember where we went, but anyway, I was somewhere with Rinpoche, and Alex Gray came along to say hello to Rinpoche. But the way he does his images of the deeper nature, the tantric nature of the whole body-mind complex, where it's just swirls of light and swirls of energy. That's not a mistaken way. It's not like people who think of their body as pure energy are loony. That's actually the deeper nature of the body. People who don't notice it become a little bit loony because they're identifying it through sort of, rather than identifying the river by the waters flowing through it, they're identifying the river by the debris floating on top of the river, you could say. And there's a difference, but we don't look at debris and say that's a river, but in fact that's what happens. So since the pure aspect of one's body and mind is a yidam, see yourself as the yidam of three indivisible kayas. In other words, our body, the pure energy, pure, joyful, pleasant energy, pleasing energy, It feels so good to be me, be me. To learn to love one's embodiment, meditationally, to just notice. Often we say meditation in Buddhism means practicing mindfulness of something. So often we say, I'm doing mindful meditation. Well, mindful of what? So in Tantra, here, it's mindful of how your body is really this joyful little package of energy that's always in a state of flux. And it's a joyful, blissful place to be. It's joyful, blissful energy. And of course, even when you're having joyful blissfulness, there may be something else going on that you don't like so much. But if you put your mindfulness on the joyful, blissful side, that dominates the atmosphere of the moment. So so now, not holding ordinary views, see yourself as the yidam of three indivisible kayas. So Nirmanakaya like that, and then Sambhoga Kaya, meaning that one's whole emotional and sort of thought flow process transforming into the 5 or the 7 certainties. Certainties just meaning, but one of those is just always, in Tibetan, means a kind of joyful presences. Joyful presences. So often we say Sambhoga Kaya is connected to speech and to sound, and sound echoes with emotion and with thought. So emotions, thoughts, and the whole sense of communication, a world of communication with great radiance and great joy. One of the qualities of Sambhoga Kaya is that all of your friends are all saints. That's often said, that's said in sutras like the Avatamsaka, Prajnaparamita. Sangha discusses that in several of his 5 great treatises. All your friends are saints. And when I read that, I thought, gosh, I must be the only saint and the only non-saint in my whole circle. Because all my friends are very saintly. I was like, I'm the least saintly of any of my friends. I think that's probably so that I can encourage them to feel some sort of tantric swagger in their saintliness. And the Dharmakaya, one's own mind. What does it mean, one's mind rests in Dharmakaya? It means without thinking about the past or worrying about the future, resting in the present moment with completely open awareness of the divine harmony of the spheres. Chuying Yeshe in Tibetan, Dharma Dhatu Jnana. So of course we have to think about the future because we have to go shopping for whatever we want to cook tonight and tomorrow morning. We have to be sure the bills are paid. And we have to think a little bit about yesterday, like if you're running home and you ran over your neighbor's dog, you have to figure out how you're going to blame it on someone else. Like, didn't President Trump come down the street yesterday with a convoy of vehicles? It must be Trump's fault. So Chuying Yeshe means staying in the state of the here and now with radiant, clear presence. Often in Tantra said with 3 qualities of presence. Firstly, very dewa in Tibetan means sukha in Sanskrit, very joyful, almost ecstatic. I used to say ecstasy quite a little bit until it became a code word that the Homeland Security was looking at. And before that, ecstasy was such a great word. I used to also talk about like gay, kind of openly. Like, yeah, that's a really I'm in a very gay mood today. Suddenly it takes on a whole different meaning when it's absconded by given a different meaning than just like ecstasy. Don't get me wrong when I say I'm a gay blade. I just mean I'm a happy-go-lucky kind of a guy. So sukha, and the second in Tibetan selva, which means very awake, very intensely present. If you notice when you're with your lamas or with great masters, it's always like they're right on top of you. It's like, but with great love and great compassion and great caring, almost like your mom or your dad or your most beloved grandparent or grand-uncle generation, grandfather, granduncle, grandmother, grand-aunts, where they look at you very intensely and with great kind of love and almost like with pride in you. Oh yeah, little Glennie is doing nicely. He's still alive and he's not so badly off. So that kind of quality of very intense presence that one sees in great masters. And thirdly, a kind of an utter relaxation of presence. So this is often emphasized very much in the Mahamudra literature. Not holding ordinary views, practiced tantric swagger. My old days, divine pride and clear manifestations. So not holding ordinary views means not attached, not taking for granted the way things appear, remembering their dreamlike quality, hallucinatory type quality, mirage type quality. Recollecting that the way we see them is an end product of a conditional apparatus and a perceptual process. We arrive at a tree by eliminating everything that isn't tree, and then we put it in a whole, like we don't eat trees, so we don't think, oh, there's a cabbage, I'll go and eat it, and stuff like that. Noticing that it is a manifestation of the joyfulness of being. In other words, paradisical. I have a very paradisical, the bird of paradise sits in the tree of paradise behind my house. Practice divine pride and clear manifestation. Often they say these two, divine pride meaning I really have a strong sense of my own sacred nature. My own sacred nature. I understand that I am a sacred nature and all other beings sacred nature. Clear manifestation means everything appearing to me, I can see the reflection of the infinite goodness of the universe in all things. So it says, not holding ordinary, practice those, practice, te jong. Jong means like to train yourself in those. I have to look at my watch, in case you guys watching on the webinar don't want to say, why does that guy keep looking at his watch? It's because we have to keep the timing to the right amount of time. And Jonas suggested that I look towards the door where there's a big clock, but I never trust anyone else's clock. I can't remember where I was in a Lama's house recently, and it had 10 clocks walking around, and they all had different times on them. Not letting negative thoughts arise, turn to the deep and the clear. So not letting negative thoughts here means doubting your own sacredness. Doubting the natural goodness of all things you experience, not doubting in the kind of way we use it. Doubt here means hesitation. Without hesitation, experiencing yourself in all things in this wonderful way. Turn to the deep and the clear. So the deep means the radiant emptiness of things, the radiant emptiness, which in Tantra is the clear light nature. Turn to the deep and the clear. Generate unforgetting mindfulness, and hold it in the realm of the deep and the clear. So that's his verse on practicing the mindfulness of the tantric swagger. And I had actually chosen a couple of verses from others, from the seventh Dalai Lama, from another verse I wanted to read if I had time at the end, and we've got a couple of minutes left. So when he puts some of these in context, the Tantric Master, one with Buddha Vajradhara, stamps our mind with the four initiations, introduces us to the blissful path of the three kayas and to the ultimate nature of body and mind. That refers to first stage tantric practice. We get a tantric initiation and turn to the three kayas. What is it? Introducing to the blissful path of the three kayas and to the ultimate nature of body and mind. So that, when we receive tantric initiation, this idea of three kayas. My body is nirmanakaya. All things I see are experienced through the senses are nirmanakaya emanations. My thoughts and feelings are Sambhogakaya, and my speech is Sambhogakaya. My sort of reverberance, like, oh, that's very Sambhogakaya of you. Oh, your Sambhogakaya just went up a decibel point. But it means one's thoughts and one's feelings resting in the natural joyfulness of being, the natural celebration of being. One's mind is Dharmakaya. Mind here just meaning, because everything in a sense is mind, but in a particular sense, one's spirit, I guess perhaps would be a better word, resting in just the vast formlessness of being, allowing all of the nirmanakaya emanations just to flow. A kind of so this word spontaneity is very big in the practice of Tantra. In other words, you don't need to practice compassion. A Buddha doesn't think, I will be compassionate. A Buddha simply looks with compassionate eyes, and compassionate words follow, and compassionate deeds follow. Compassionate feelings follow, compassionate thoughts follow, and then compassionate deeds follow. So Nirmanakaya is the spontaneous expression of Daetong Yeshe, is the expression in Tibetan, bliss and wisdom of emptiness. Lenke Daetong Yeshe. Bliss and wisdom of emptiness born together simultaneously. In other words, simultaneously occurring. I'm both blissful and I'm leaving my mind in the formless Dharmakaya or Dharmadhatu state, and everything I do is an expression of my natural enlightenment. Everything I say is that expression. And in this way, trying to always connect with the whole universe on this kind of platform of tantric theater. So sometimes the question comes up, what happens when you encounter someone who's completely socially barbarian, a social barbarian, and it is very difficult to put up with. And how do you deal with what seems to be problems? So this is like a big issue, becomes a big issue, isn't it? So in Tantra, we refer to that as the expression of the four trinle, the four Buddha karmas. So for instance, if Bill were to be problematic in any way, then I would say a few pacifying terms, and he would go, oh, purr, purr. Or if that didn't work, then I'd have to change the subject and talk about something he really liked, like fast cars. If that didn't work, then the third of them is subduing. And the way you do that in China, the first time I went to China, went to Tibet through China, was through Chengdu and trying to get in, and they told me, well, it's closed to foreigners, so the only way you get is to go in to any of the 6 military offices that can get you in, and first act a little angry, and then act like you're totally crazy, because Chinese people are afraid of insanity and think it's contagious. Then calm down and apologize and tell them they're doing their best and you'll be back tomorrow. So I did that for 6 weeks, and finally 3 weeks, and finally every day for 3 weeks, and finally they gave me my Tibet permit. Of course, I was the only foreigner in Tibet at the time because no one else had that patience. So the third one means subduing, means being kind of forceful and wrathful and pressing your point. So when it says compassion and love in Tantra, it means learning to be interactive with the world in order to express your own vision of how things should go, committing to it, but doing so as an expression of Buddha karma, of your creative output, your creative flow. And the key word often used there is Rope Lagin Naljor, playful divine yoga. In other words, always trying to be playful, keep a sense of humor in what you're doing, and a sense of theater in what you're doing. The self is a reification. We're not trying to con anyone, but the way someone sees you influences how they are towards you. And so towards a little child, you go, gaga, goo-goo, gaga, goo-goo. Now, if you did that towards your boss during the day, it wouldn't work out so well. And so the playful divine yoga means trying to communicate with peoples on their own sphere of being, what's important to them, rather than what's of importance to you. Of course, you know what's important to you, and if you want to press that in some way, but in a joyful, celebratory, kind of transformative, theatrical way. So Rope La, playful deity yoga. I'm a playful deity. This is my yoga. I like it much better than the stretchy exercises. Especially hot yoga. I hate hot yoga. I prefer to be playful yoga. So anyway, so the seventh Dalai Lama concludes like that. I'll just take one more verse from him, and then I think we have to go because it's supposed to be 1 hour. Or did we have something? You walked over there with a microphone, so what was the purpose? Oh, that's to read the thing, right?
No, it's to dedicate.
Okay, yeah, okay. So then, on the basis of this, one can bathe consciousness in the mother clear light. In other words, when you go into deep meditation, you generate clear light of mind. You relax the flow of thoughts and sensations and so on, go through. You shape energies into the form of a tantric deity and abide unwaveringly in the deep, clear yoga, which does not divide meditation from non-meditation. In other words, in your meditation sessions, your sitting sessions, you basically relax mind into its own infinity nature, its own dharma dhatu nature, release all of the knots and the kinks and iron out all of the wrinkles and arise from that and go around your life, not dividing meditation from non-meditation, because then everything you do is done with awareness. So not having to place awareness any particular things. All things that appear in the world are seen as inconceivable abodes of wisdom. Endless beings dwelling therein are known to be an ocean of awakened beings. By the profound yogas of the secret path, such as taking food as ambrosia, substances offered to the dakinis, dakas and dakinis who reside in the channels and energy forces of the body, one's every action becomes tantric practice. In other words, when you do this well, everything you do is tantric practice. Outside, the dance of the consort captures the mind. The consort here represents the objects of the five senses. Everything you see is like a dancing daka or dakini. Everything you hear, like drum-beating dakas and dakinis. And everything you smell, like really good cook dances and dakinis. Inside one, and spread into it. So the dance spreads into the 10 directions. In other words, everything you do becomes a great dance of bliss. Inside, one experiences the vast path of the union of bliss and void. Inside, everything that one experiences arises with great bliss, and one does not identify with it as separate from the universal thread of being. Like the flow of a river, pursue this practice. You who have mastered tantric methods, heroes and heroines who have accomplished these great yogas, having totally separated your mind from obscuration, prejudices, and grasping at life as mundane, do you not abide in constant joy? Yeah. So he finishes, the Seventh Dalai Lama finishes his poem, that if you can drop the bad habit of grasping at things in mundane appearances, the way Fox News or CNN News or the newspapers or your cultural conditioning, your genetic processing faculties sort of throw you into looking at them, to go beyond that. And if you can do that, do you not abide? You who have already mastered that, do you not abide? Oh, I shouldn't have said yeah, should I? I gave myself away. Yeah. So anyway, that's the practicing of the third mindfulness, is that mindfulness of the nature of the tantric yogas in one's own life. And often I conclude anything I say on Tantra by quoting Tsongkhapa, who said in his verse on his own autobiography that it's well known as the sun and the moon is the basic fact that Tantra is the fast and easy path to enlightenment. There's many great Buddhist scholars and learned scholars of Buddhism who have read this and studied it, but yet they don't accomplish the practice. If they are wise, who is stupid? Tsongkhapa sometimes like to be a little direct. So like that, so I think we'll now close and dedicate merit, and we'll do the prayer for the rebirth of Kebje Gelek Doshi Chung. If I could get a copy over here, because mine is on the table back at the house. So it's now been about a year or so since Rinpoche passed away. That means he's probably, 5 or 6 months old in someone's womb right now, walking around them. The mom is walking around thinking, oh, I feel awfully good. And they say if when a high incarnation comes in to a woman's womb, that she feels very very ecstatic and very joyful, and her body feels light, and she has many auspicious dreams and all. So somewhere out there's somewhere walking around like that. And soon will be popping out, the bun will be popping out of the oven, and we should make the request that he be quickly recognized, enthroned, and well-trained. Go ahead. Or do you want me to? Yeah. You kind of looked like in asking, so, but you put the microphone over there, so why?
For the four immeasurables.
Oh, okay. I bow to Buddha, the one who loves all sentient beings, to Dharma and Sangha, the yidams and special bhagawans of the Tantric texts. I bow to you, ornamented by a wealth of Manjushri's qualities, who teaches us continually. You are the source of inestimable goodness and virtues. I bow to you, my Bodhisattva Lama, who cures through a rain cloud of blessings temporary and ultimate illnesses, the ignorance and obscurations within the many fortunate students. Let rise a new and young sun to lead us, your long-time, poor, dear disciples who still yearn for more of your teachings. By the blessings of the three jewels, Tara, mother of the Buddhas, and Yavajagini, may my dream come true. Then the two verses by the Gyalwa Rinpoche and J. Tamshi Khenpa, the Dalai Lama. O Sakyamuni, who taught through various modes of reason the profound truth of dependent origination. O Losang Gyalwa and your spiritual heirs, rain on us here now heavenly showers of virtue and goodness. Where precious Dharma had not yet spread, with pure intention, Ngawa Gyalek Namgyal illuminated both sacred words and realization. So may his reincarnation appear quickly for the glory of the Buddha's teachings and for the sake of all beings.